Welcome back to Financial Therapy. It's not just about the money. I'm personal financial planner, columnist, and financial therapist Rick Kahler. Research tells us that 90% of all financial decisions are made emotionally, not logically. For nearly 4 decades, I've been helping people make better money decisions. So what makes my financial worldview different from most financial experts? I blend the nuts and bolts of financial advice with the emotions that drive making them. Good money decisions are not just about the money. So let's get started with today's episode. Well, welcome back to another edition, and this is the continuation of a discussion on the Enneagram patterns and how they do money. And last time we got into the money script categories and mostly talked about money avoidance money scripts and how they apply to each of the Enneagram types or patterns, as they're being called by forward-thinking Enneagramists. I just invented that word.
I like that.
An Enneagramist. What would we like to? Where would we like to go today?
Well, one of the topics that we talked about, Rick, was saving and security. And I think that might be interesting. Using, again, the 3 motivations of the 3 centers, agency for the body center, bonding for the heart center, and certainty for the head center. My guess would be that you get lots of questions from your clients, and our listeners would get lots of questions about, how do I save? How do I create more security? I just can't, and those kinds of things. If I'm guessing right.
Yeah, that's a big one, and it's the biggest polarization that I work with in financial therapy. Are parts of us that want to save, parts of us that want to spend, and I mean, take IFS out of it. It's a big paradox with many people in making a money decision.
Yeah. That was my sense. So I'm glad to hear that. What are the most common things that you hear about this? How do I learn to save? How do I change my behavior? What do people ask you?
Well, there's typically the critic is very involved in this polarization. Because there's messages that I ought to be saving, I should be saving, I need to be saving for retirement. Yes, how can I save? And how could I reduce spending? I need to spend less. There's that awareness, and then there's the behavior of, well, I'm not guaranteed tomorrow. I need to live for today, and I want something. I earn it. I deserve it. And so you have this interior fight between that. And I might say, Joan, that the opposite of this is true, but it's not publicized much. Mm-hmm. And that's a part that does not want to spend. There could even be some critical message. Well, you should spend. You really should get that fixed, or you maybe should buy a safer car.
And they just don't. Yeah.
But they don't. Now, obviously, that is big with the money vigilant money scripts.
Exactly.
That spending is bad, saving is good. I could sense there could be a little 6 energy in this, being fearful of spending, and it represents security. The more money that I have, but those are.
And we're going to have another person in the same, operating from the same pattern, who's going to have the opposite. So, as you said, it's very polarizing and very polarized. Both in IFS terms and otherwise. Well, one thing we could do is we could go through the three centers and kind of make a guess at what we might see in the patterns around the idea of money as security is what I'm going to pull out of this. Savings is to create security in general, or we can use that as our hypothesis. So this time, let me start with the certainty group centered around the 6 pattern. And of course, there's a lot of ways that different individuals could determine that money inured to or fought against the idea of certainty. And certainty and security could be synonyms for some people, but not necessarily. And I always, for years and years, I've always wanted to walk away from the stereotypes. And that's something in me. But in this instance, I really think it bears right. So we could create a caricature 6 who has decided that X amount of money is necessary for security and follows a very structured path, sort of like a 1, to create that, and keeps a very close eye. But that's only, I think, going to happen if that individual has determined that money equals certainty, that money equals certainty, which equals safety. Okay. If you have an individual with a 6 pattern, leading with the 6 pattern, who has not made that determination or that money script, it's going to look really, really different. And you could have spendthrift, you could have anything. And I think it's really important to fine tune this down to the individuals here. If, for example, we had a client with a 6 pattern, who had identified with a 6 pattern, who was having trouble saving as much as they would like, we might go to trying to illuminate those money scripts and figure out where they had disconnected money from certainty or disconnected money from security. So I'm working backwards. Mm-hmm. And I hope this makes sense, because I'm thinking as I talk, which is not always a great idea. But I think you'd have to unhook it that way.
Yeah, that makes sense. That if the pattern 6 is not identifying money with safety or security,
right,
that they would be running the other direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and because it's usually polarized, you might see something really opposite. Of course, you might see any gradation of this.
That could extend, as I'm just thinking, if something is viewed as unsafe, unsecure, pattern might have a real hard time investing in the stock market.
Right, because there's so little certainty.
There's so little certainty, where money in the bank.
And there could be hidden motives and hidden stuff going on. And I mean, I've got enough 6 running in me that, as you've heard, I've got some of that personally. And it comes from not knowing what the answer might be. That's my definition of certainty, not being a head type, but with a strong line.
And even if banks were not viewed as safe.
That's right.
And the stock market was, they could be.
It's all going to be the individual's money scripts. We're going right back to those scripts and stories and wherever they came from. And that's why I think we have to be so careful to individualize this. So let's flesh this out. So if we went to the 7 side, the stereotype, which I push against, is that 7s would tend to be not careful with their money and not focused on their money. But I don't think that that's true. I think, again, it's the individual and how they factor in their internal decisions, the place of money in creating certainty. What they determine is the connection between money and certainty. And that's going to be driven, again, by family, circumstance, and all of that. I mean, you do sometimes see, a 7 who invests an enormous amount of time and energy in a project and then seems to turn on a dime and move to another. And that individual might not be paying attention to the financial cost of it. But what I think I'm saying and what I think I'm seeing is that would be because there is no link in that individual's internal decision-making matrix that money equals certainty. Or there is the money avoidance script in there that says that money equals limitation.
Because freedom is so important.
Freedom is primary importance. Freedom and options. Options is another really good word. Lack of limitation. You might expect to see in a 7 sometimes a resistance to dealing with money because it's seen as limiting. And then you might have another 7 who doesn't see it as limiting and acts absolutely differently.
I'm thinking of a couple, and that this is not an unusual couple. It's not unusual to have a saver spender.
Right.
And it's not unusual that one is a 6 and one is a 7.
Interesting.
And I'm thinking of a couple that I worked with that actually I led with the Enneagram, which was highly enlightening to them. Mm-hmm. And one of them was really locked into needing safety, needing certainty, needing a plan.
Right.
So being the saver, and the other was locked into experience and wanting to live in the here and now, mm-hmm. and wanting a plan to spend. Mm-hmm. And I won't go through it. The culmination of this was absolutely beautiful, as both of them saw that they really wanted the same thing in their relationship. And right. They were a great team because they both had strengths that the other one needed.
Exactly. If you put the two together, it created a much stronger whole. Yeah.
Right. And instead it was creating weakness because they weren't embracing, right? They were throwing bombs at each other rather than embracing.
Yeah.
The ones saving.
And using the strengths that each had appropriately. Yeah. As you were talking, I remember a client who led with the 7 pattern a long time ago, who was sort of not the characteristic 7, because this person carried a lot of visible anxiety all the time. Very 7, very limitation resistant and avoidant and all of that, but a lot of anxiety. And that person, if I'm remembering him right, had enormous hesitations about money and was quite both vigilant and avoidant, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Mm-hmm. So it was almost like a trap. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that to finish it out, if we go over to the 5 side, I think you said this in our last segment, because privacy is and holding things to oneself is so prized in the 5 pattern, we would expect to see a hesitance to share about money, not to share the money, but to share about money. You also might see, because many people who lead with the 5 pattern carry the idea that minimalism is highly prized in the 5 structure. You see that all the time. And it's not relevant right now why, but you do see it in the narratives. That minimalism would look like an hesitation to spend on themselves and to fix the things that need to be fixed, and it's good enough and stuff like that. But on the other side would look like generosity to others when they chose. So it, again, is all dependent on the internal stories and determinations that have been made.
So are you saying that they would have could have a hesitation to spend on themselves, which supports the minimalistic tendencies, but could be more apt to spend on others?
Yes, and I've seen that. And I think I think probably it's that the minimalism has to do with certainty for their own, basic needs of living. And for others is an innate generosity, non-judgmental stance, which is very 5, and a way almost to lean over to the bonding people and cement relationship.
Yes, I was thinking of that they could be mistaken just in that act as being more or 2 energy.
Yeah. The one thing that you would see, because of the certainty motivator playing in the background, is that they would be very careful in the choices they made about it. It wouldn't be casual spending. It would be very carefully chosen and very quiet, usually.
You are nailing a friend.
Okay. I'm glad.
Who has a 5 pattern. And I mean, this is him.
Yeah. It's funny when that happens. I actually was thinking a friend of mine who carries the 5 pattern and who is one of the most generous people I've ever seen, but not to themselves.
Yes, that is
Not to themselves. But again, if I go back to the model that I'm working with, it's all around how they've determined what they need to be certain about. It's all wrapped around that.
fascinating.
So I think I'm a little bit aware of the time, which you're carrying, not me, but let me try to get to the other 2 centers a little more quickly. So if we went over to bonding and we were thinking about security, again, if we start with the 3, my view is that because bonding is sitting on positive image, positive recognition, positive approval, that money is going to be, as I said in the last segment, integrally tied into that, into the internal determination of what image it was that they were trying to project, consciously or unconsciously. Most of this is unconscious. And that's the way that they protect the bond. You do see with many 3s, many very successful 3s, that there's never enough. It never feels like enough money. And I'd have to think about that more deeply, but I've seen it enough times, and this is with people who have a lot and people who don't have a lot, where money and security is tied together. Now, of course, there's an instinct, the self-preservation instinct is sitting on that, and it may be that, but it has to do with, I think, preserving the relationships.
And when you said never enough, that fits right into money worship.
That's right.
That more money will make things better.
Yeah. And using the frame that we're using this time, because it will keep the relationships strong. It'll keep the positive regard coming, would be the simplest way of saying it.
Yeah.
Now, if we go over to the 2, I have seen quite often, and we talked about this before, 2s who neglect their own financial needs and minimize their own needs for financial security in the service of others. You don't see it often to an extreme, at least I haven't, but you do see a self-sacrificing behavior. And again, that's because there's somewhere in the unconscious a determination that this is what's necessary for the bond and the relationship. And those are all those clients that you had for a while, or many of them, who were fabulous therapists, but who couldn't keep their bookkeeping in order and couldn't bring themselves to raise their prices when they should, or to value their work.
And I've seen this present itself. I'm thinking back decades ago that I had a client that gave to her own hurt.
Oh, yeah.
And it was just like, well, if we could just stop this huge amount of giving that's going out, this would right your ship. And that was so difficult for them.
Well, so let's take that as an example. What we could do now with what we know is we could work with that person to undo or work with the protector parts, we'll go to IFS, who had made the determination that giving was the way to create relationship, and that if they stopped, they would lose relationship. There'd have to be parts in there that believed that in that instance.
Right.
But we'd know that it was a key issue because we'd know that the primary motivator underneath had to do with the priority being relationship and bond.
Yep.
Another word for it is acceptance.
Yep.
So I'm this is new. It's a new frame, and I'm always looking for how are we going to put this into practice? How are we going to operationalize this? And there's one right there.
Mm-hmm.
And to finish it out with the 4, let's see. 4 again would be more similar to 3 because it would have to do with the image that they felt was best to get the attention. It's not approval in this case, but the attention that they were seeking. The paradox here is that sometimes 4s will behave in ways that appear to push the relationship away, even though we know that they prize it. So it's complicated.
And is the 3 is more concerned about approval? Is that right?
Yes, recognition and for their efforts and approval. The 4 is more they're looking for validation of who they are and what they believe, but the connection piece is of huge importance, and the feeling of the connection. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let me try very quickly to do saving and security with the agency triad, the body triad. So in the 9, very often you get a ignoring behavior because you don't want to deal with anything that's going to upset the harmonizing that you do to keep yourself in control of yourself. So you will see something similar to what we were talking about in the 2 pattern. You will see 9s who are hesitant to request payment for their work or recognition for their work. You'll even see 9s who will push against that recognition. But in this instance, it's because of the link that's been made internally between keeping everything calm and no conflict and being in control of themselves. In the 8, again, you have an instinctual pattern in the self-pres state where you see sometimes very unbridled spending, or you can see something that I identify as kind of a depression mentality of there's never enough of the necessities and stockpile. That's clearly associated with the instinct, but again, going back to the model we're working with, it is an effort to not be controlled. And if we go to the 1, what do you think? How does the internal determination of right and wrong, good and bad, influence your view of money?
Well, if it is right to save and to have,
then you do it.
Going to do that. Right. If that is logical and makes sense, then the discipline is there to make it happen.
That's right. And I just want to, I know, heard me say this many, many times. We have to be careful when working with people who lead with the 1 pattern to always, always remember that sense of right and wrong, that list of right and wrong and good and bad is individualized to that person and is not shared by other people who carry the 1 pattern necessarily, because it's all internally generated. So you can't ever generalize that everyone feels that saving is the right thing to do. That one you might get, but what you don't get is the method, what saving looks like, how it's done, how much, or any of those details. And you could even have somebody who goes counter to it. You can always have a counter, which is a whole nother discussion.
I'm thinking of, the 1 pattern often called the reformers, and they have a cause, they have a purpose. And if a 1 has a cause and a purpose, say of healing the planet or environmentalism, they could have a very rigid belief system that money is bad, materialism is bad, things are bad, the institutions that produce them are bad.
That's right.
And be very opposed to investing in stock markets or
again, it's the same behavior that it could be in any other type, but it's coming from a very different place. I think you do get the reformer, occasionally a reformer 1 who will put all of their assets, financial assets, into a cause because it's the right thing to do, neglecting themselves. Because it's the right thing to do. But again, we have to look underneath and figure out how that relates to an internal feeling of autonomy or agency.
Mm-hmm.
It's the other thing with agency is that it's about choosing. And I like the word autonomy. It's not what Dan's been using or in the book, but I like autonomy because it has the flavor of being in control of oneself and one's everything. Yeah. Appeals to my nine-ness.
Well, Joan, it has been super. And we're going to do one more segment. So stay tuned again for next time. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Rick. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks for joining me, Rick Kahler, for another episode of Financial Therapy. It's not just about the money. This is where I combine the nuts and bolts of financial advice with the emotions that drive making them. Remember, every financial behavior, whether it appears illogical to you or others, makes perfect sense when we understand the underlying beliefs, feelings, and thoughts. Sign up for my weekly blog at financialawakenings.com. I hope you'll join me again for our next episode.